is the name that we lovingly use for the next generation for Scratch, is focused on building a foundation that will allow us to better address the needs of Scratchers from all backgrounds and with a broad range of interests in the years to come. So how do we do that? Well, it was funny. I started to put together this like long diagram of how the Scratch team's design process works. And I got about halfway through it, and then I was like having deja vu. And it was because basically all I was drawing was this thing, which is the creative learning spiral. And I was like, and so our process for iterating on Scratch looks much the same as it does for a kid who's using Scratch. We imagine, create, play, share, and reflect as a team. So our goals, input from the community, input from all of you, and our experiences using Scratch with kids leads us towards a small number of ideas that we'd like to push forward for any given iteration. We create prototypes, and then people are always surprised when I say this. We play with our prototypes, and it's really annoying sometimes. Like when we're working on sound stuff, there's like cat sounds and duck sounds coming from the corner. But what we do is we just constantly iterate on that until we feel like we have something that's good enough to put in front of kids. This probably sounds really familiar if any of you have ever created and shared a Scratch project. And so once we feel like it's good enough, we'll share them with a small number of kids during an event that we call Playtest. And then we pore over hours and hours of screen recordings and field notes as a team to reflect in an effort to understand what we should do for the next cycle. And this is how we've been building Scratch 3.0. And yes, you heard that right. We learn by trying out our ideas with kids, like this, right? So sometimes that takes the form of a workshop. Sometimes that takes the form of an after-school program that we're engaged with. Sometimes that means reaching out directly to individual families or schools or after-school programs or other groups. But in all of these cases, what we're trying to do is understand how kids are using Scratch at all different levels. So sometimes we're looking at kids who have never used Scratch before, and we really want to understand how they're seeing it, how they're using it, what's tripping them up, what's working well, what are the things that we could do better for the next versions of Scratch. But then we're also working with kids who have used Scratch before, who maybe have gotten a little bit bored, who want it to do more things, who want it to connect, and we want to find ways to connect it to their interests. And then sometimes there's kids who have really been using Scratch for a long time, and they really want to do something more. They want to push Scratch to its limits. And so we work with all of these different types of kids to understand how to evolve things. So today we're going to show you Scratch, and you're actually going to get to play with Scratch 3.0. So, woo! So where are we now? So what we're trying to do is we're working right now towards an alpha, and then we'll have a beta release and finally a full launch in the community next year. I'll get into the timings later. I just want to call attention that we are nowhere near any of these things. We are over here, maybe somewhere back here,
a little further
behind the piano. And so there will be bugs. A lot of these things aren't final. We're going to show you a bunch of stuff that are prototypes that we've built, and some of them are working well, some of them aren't. But we just want to give you a sense of where we're at. So before we move on and just dive into things, I want to, so this is a huge group. So we're going to do Q&A at the end, but we're going to do it a little bit differently this time. So if you have a question, what we'd like you to do is actually post it on Twitter and send it to @Scratch with the hashtag Scratch3. And Saskia and me, who's actually remote from our team, will actually try to aggregate all the questions so that we can try to get to as many as we can at the end. This is an actual question from a Scratch user that they left on my profile. Will you be adding more unicorn sprites in Scratch 3? Well, I mean, the answer is obviously yes. Carl and I keep having these debates. We're like, should we have 6 more unicorn sprites or 7 more unicorns?
Kind of want 7.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. But these are the kinds of hard-hitting questions that we want for the Q&A. So, but we'll cover everything in this session from the release cycle to compatibility. But please let us know what questions you have throughout the session on Twitter, and we'll try our best to aggregate and answer them at the end. So for this session, we're gonna really focus on two of those types of kids that we were talking about, or the two of those types of experiences or pathways that I was talking about at the beginning. We're really going to talk a lot about the low floor, which is a metaphor that we sometimes use to describe kids who are getting started with Scratch for the first time, kids who are engaging with some of these ideas for the first time. And what are some of the things that we're doing in Scratch 3.0 to make Scratch easier and more compelling when you're just getting started? The other thing that we're going to focus on is what we call the wide walls. So those are the kids who are engaging with Scratch but looking for things that can kind of push the edges of what Scratch can do. And so we'll talk about everything from robotics to different types of software extensions, all this kind of stuff today. But there's lots of other things that we're doing as well for the high ceiling and otherwise that we're not going to be able to get to today, but I just wanted to preface that a little bit. So with that, go for it, Carl.
Cool. Yeah, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the low floor. We're really excited to share some of the things that we're working on with you. As Andrew mentioned, we're really focused on making sure that the experience for kids who are coming to Scratch for the first time is really empowering and really compelling, and they feel creative agency over what they're making. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that that still stays a part of Scratch? So one thing that we're doing at a high level, here's a rough outline of some of the sketches that we have for 3.0, but we're trying to remove some of the complexity in the interface while also highlighting some more areas to provide tinkering and open up those spaces. And we're also trying to promote features that are more commonly used, such as add a sprite or add a backdrop. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But also, there's probably a pretty glaring difference of this from 2.0, and I'll get to that. I'll get to the elephant in the room, but that'll come in a bit. So zooming in a little bit, one place we want to explore to open up, in 1.4 and 2.0, we had an area that sort of highlighted some of the state of a sprite, and we really want to bring that out in 3.0 and make it interactive. So that's things like the XY coordinates, the show and hide, the direction, the rotation style. And some of these feel pretty abstract, but sometimes this is the first place that kids interact with these things. So we want to make sure that they're interactive so that you can go and you can type into the X field and the cat will respond to that. Or when you're dragging the cat across the stage, those values will update. You can toggle show and hide on. But again, this is all stuff you'll get to play with when we open it up for play. Did you have something you want to say? Okay, cool. Another place that we're sort of exploring is visual menus. And so I was showing some new interface parts that kind of work like the blocks. You can go in, you can tinker, and you can try them out. Another place that kind of feels a bit abstract is rotation. That seems something that we've seen kids struggle with in the past. And how do we make that more visual? How do we make that more intuitive and concrete? So we were starting to design these menus that help to describe or to emulate what's actually happening. So you can still go and you can type 90 or 180 or whatnot, but you also have this radial slider, so you can drag it around and turn it, and that'll have an effect on the sprite itself. Another place that we're exploring is more like iconographic menus. So this is a block for the Lego We Do, which maybe some of you are familiar with, sort of highlighting the different ways that you can tilt the block. And as we start doing more things with hardware, it's going to be more obscured when you're actually having an effect on a physical device or that being an input. So we're also playing around with some indicators. So if you have the menu open and you tilt the block in a certain way, maybe that becomes green, so you know, oh, actually it's pointing down. I think that'd be really helpful, especially with Lego when you've actually started constructing something and building it into a model, and you need a reference point. Going to a completely different part of the editor, one of the things we found is sound recording is very compelling. It's one of the most used features in Scratch Junior. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. And we really want to make sure it's easy and accessible for people because it's a great way for them to inject a bit of personality and a sense of identity into their projects, whether that's creating an animation or doing crazy sound effects for a game or even just beatboxing. So we have this new record flow that maybe you can pop up from a block. You go in and you say, okay, new sound, I just want to record it, and it sends this dialogue up. So you can record, it clarifies when you're recording, and then afterward you're immediately thrown into an editor where you can sort of trim it and remove any background sounds. And I think this will be really helpful for kids who are doing that animation style stuff so they can pull it in really quickly and then test that. So those were a couple different features that we're starting to explore. Some other spaces that we're thinking about more in terms of like onboarding are like micro worlds. So we're really trying to think of like, what's the experience like when all of us aren't in the room with the kids, and how do they get started? So the idea of a micro world kind of reduces some of the complexity of the interface even further. It takes out elements like backdrops and sort of has a more limited blocks palette so they can focus on a few things and not feel overwhelmed. There's buttons up in the top that say, add more blocks, less blocks. You can transition to the full editor. And this is just sort of a way of getting started. And it allows kids to focus in on things that maybe are really compelling really quickly. So like change color or effects, as an example. Another place that we're sort of exploring, this is sort of inspired by some of the activity cards that we've worked on, especially ones that are sort of nonlinear and very small, digestible chunks. We want to inject things like the tips window right into the workspace themselves, so that kids can navigate there. And maybe these are related to sprites that they add. So in this case, they go ahead and add the magic potion, and maybe it comes with, play sound and change color. And after they go through this process, maybe it cues them to try other things that seem relevant to what they're interested in. And then finally coming back, this may seem very familiar to some of you. 1.4 for those of you who don't know. So we moved the stage onto the right-hand side of the screen, the blocks on the left. And I think this comes back to something that Andrew was saying, which is that, 3.0 is another opportunity for us to reflect, and we want to go back and change some things. So while this may seem like why are they going back to this? Well, we've also seen, the first step of kids being they don't know where to drag the blocks, and that seems like a big issue. So one of the ways we're resolving that is like a larger overhaul to the interface and the hierarchy in general, such that the blocks are right there. The first thing you see, the first thing you want to click on, the first thing you want to move. And we've seen kids try to drag them to the cat, which seems perfectly reasonable. And maybe that should do something, and maybe that's something we should explore further. But the hope is that we can get them started on the right step by dragging the blocks there first. So a little step back for us, but a step forward hopefully for the kids. And I guess I'll hand it off to Andrew to talk more about extensions and wide walls.
Sure. Admittedly, there's lots and lots of things that we're doing for wide walls, and we'll actually show some of them in the demo that's coming up. But there are a lot of folks here that are really excited about extensions. And so this is going to be a very extension-centric way of talking about wide walls. But we do see this as one of the ways in which Scratch can leverage all of these tremendous new technologies, new products that are coming out to market, new things like Arduino and Microbit and Root and all of these different amazing devices. And today, it's kind of an arduous process for us to get those into Scratch and get those in front of the community. And so one of the things that we've been doing for Scratch 3.0 is really rethinking how we do extensions, and that's at the technical level and at the design level. But what I'm actually going to talk about is kind of at the philosophical level. So this is an extension that we're really excited about that we've been testing with kids a lot, and it's been a ton of fun. And this is actually a speech extension, so it does speech synthesis as well as speech recognition. And I think most people today are familiar with speech synthesis and speech recognition kind of in the context of, Alexa or Siri or Google Home, right? So it's like, hi computer, I would like a sandwich. Okay, sandwich is coming. But I think for us, this is really exciting technology, but how do kids play with it? How do they tinker with it? How do they use it as a creative material, right? So instead of using it to order a pizza or a book, how do you use it to tell knock-knock jokes? Right? Or with some of the other technologies that we're excited about, like Spotify or digital media services, where you have this wealth of content that is truly, truly deeply relevant to a kid's identity, to a kid's culture, to the world that they inhabit. How do we make it easier to bring those things into Scratch? So this is another extension that we've been playing with that some of you might have seen that we released on Scratch X, that's for Spotify. And so you can pull up any song, so you can say, play music like Pharrell Happy, and then you can trigger events on each beat or every bar of the music. Another technology that we're excited about and I never thought I would ever say this, is IoT. Right, so most IoT stuff is kind of bland today. It's all framed around convenience. So how do my lights turn on when I walk in the room, and how do they turn off when I leave the room? Or how do they change color temperature when it's later in the day versus earlier in the day, right? But this feels like a really great opportunity to kind of push this, to say like, well, how do we take something that's as bland as turning lights on and off and turn this into something that's truly compelling as a creative material, right? So it's one thing to just turn lights on and off, but you mix that with the Spotify extension and a random block, and you've got this, right? So you've got on every beat, set the light to a random color, right? Well, I mean, that's a 3-block recipe for a bedroom rave, right? So, and so I think these are the types of things that we're really excited about when we think about extensions. It's not just what can the extensions individually do and what can this ecosystem that we're creating do, but how can the ecosystem actually start to talk to each other to create new types of experiences that we hadn't thought about before or that weren't possible before, like bedroom raves. All right, so I think we're done talking for a little while. I think we'd like to actually do some demos, and hopefully the demo gods are with us today. So I'm going to transition over.
Cool. So another way you could use it is like an interactive storytelling. So I'm going to tell a story from last night when Andrew and I went out to go get some dinner after we had reflected on some of our slides, and maybe some of you experienced this. And maybe by seeing what's up there, you might know what I'm going to talk about. But maybe I need to stand over here too. So we're out. We're having a great time. There's a lot of sun. Demo gods. There's a lot of sun. Here comes the sun. And we sat down and we sort of ordered our food. And next thing we know, it got really windy. And then next thing we know, our food's there, there's dirt in it because it was windy, and, oh, come on. And then immediately after that, it started to rain. So there's a couple bugs to work out. Maybe it doesn't like the microphone.
Yeah, it is always really funny watching what it thinks that we're saying. Like, we have a reporter for it, and sometimes it just goes really off the rails. So we have lots of bugs, but maybe that's a feature too. I'm not sure. At this point, I'd love to just start to show you Scratch 3.0. So this is a real live version of Scratch 3.0. Everything that we're doing is open source, so it's all totally open to the public right now. If you want to hack on the code, you can do that. If you want to pull this up and start to play with it, give us like 2 minutes and we'll get everybody started with it. But I'm just going to show you a quick example of how it works and where we're at. So, I like the Scratch Cat, but I think it needs more dance partiness. So I'm going to look for a stage. And now I've got a stage with my Scratch Cat on it. And I'm going to add a sprite because I think I want my Scratch Cat to start a band. And the Scratch Cat likes bass drums, obviously. So I'm going to put this here. This is really awkward to use from the side. So I've got this, and I don't think I want the space. Maybe let's do the left arrow. Okay, that's working. Now, Scratch Cat also plays the saxophone. This is a fun trivia fact that you might not have known. So I'll put the saxophone over here, and that seems cool. So let's hook that up to maybe another block here, and we'll do that with the right arrow key. All right. Scratch Cat also plays the bananas. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to put in another block here, and we'll do the down arrow maybe. And you know what? I'm going to record a sound. So I'm going to say banana. Cool. Whoops.
Banana.
That sounds weird. All right, but that's great. We're going to make it sound even weirder.
Banana.
Great. So now we've got our banana. You can tell that the sound editor is far from complete. In fact, it's not. It's completely gone. Same thing with the costume editor. We're working on it. But I want it to play my new banana sound every time that I press the down arrow.
Banana. Banana.
But that's not weird enough. We're going to use one of our new blocks, which is called the set pitch effect block. So it's kind of like graphic effects, but for sounds. And I'm going to put a little randomness in here, because that's my favorite thing to do in Scratch. And now let's try it.
Banana.
All right.
Nailed it.
So now we have our great Scratch cat band.
Banana.
All right, cool. So what we'd like you folks to do is actually just play with this. So we've put this up on a public location that is going to be up from now until the alpha release that we'd like you to all just go to now, and we'll give folks about 10 minutes just to play around with things. As I said, we're way pre-alpha on this, so there will be bugs. And the other thing to keep in mind is you should use Google Chrome. We're fully committed to supporting Edge and Firefox and Safari and all the browsers, but at this early stage, we're kind of optimizing for Chrome right now. So if you have Chrome and you can go to this URL, you can start playing with Scratch 3. And we'll give folks about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll start the next part. Oh, the Twitter thing is at Scratch, and then at Scratch, and then include in your tweet hashtag Scratch3.
Looks like we had a slight mistake with our URL. Just update it. That'll take you there. Sorry about that. today, unless you tweet about it. Okay. Yes, tweet away your questions.
You can do some pretty funny things with the sound bots. Yeah, so in the sound category, there's the new sound effects blocks. There will be.
Okay, no.
They're not in
That's the new thing.
There'll be a bunch.
Oh.
I'll actually cover this one. So I think we can just scrap. That one. This one would be an awesome. This one I'm happy to answer. Happy to talk about this one. This one, I'll address this. Sorry, not because I don't want to answer it, but because I'll answer it in the back. This one I put under high ceiling.
Or just what's the user user?
Yeah. And this one is pretty esoteric, so I might skip that one. Okay. Cool. The answer is yes.
That's good.
How long do you think that make is going to take?
5 minutes.
Okay. Cool, because I think we should let people keep playing.
Yeah, I think so too. So give people like another 5.
I completely left out all the stuff about touch.
It's okay.
It's just like,
It's cool. Actually, I can. So the first fact question, or the second fact question, no, the third fact question is about platforms.
yeah,
I could weave some touch stuff into that.
solid. It is so warm.
Oh, we had a mistake in it.
Yes. It was. I put it into the like repo. So LOK was in the wrong spot, and we just didn't catch that. No, I fixed it immediately. It was late when we were building that slot. That was the one I was like, if we don't change this now, we're gonna forget about it. And then there are a lot of people who love me out.
Yeah, let's skip that. That's like just kind of. I'd be happy to answer that. It's like we want the save blocks, right? So we'll just say, they're going to save. Nice one so far.
Winged it on everything.
Okay, we can address that.
Yeah, that's what the guy was asking. I was like, you tweet it.
Yeah, we can cover that. We have a bonus slide.
Bonus
I
slides.
was wondering if we could do that.
Oh my god, there's a 3-horn unicorn. That's very good. That's pretty good. You look like you're really trying to be fresh.
I am.
Yeah, you're just like,
I did talk about meatballs.
I talked about it.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
shared minds.
Yeah, sorry. Banana thing. Hi.
Many people would be interested in trying out the voice. Is it can be activated? Because the URL with Eric Rosenbaum,
Yeah,
it doesn't
it's
have
hidden.
it.
Yeah, it's hidden. Yeah, we'll address it in the Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll share that out so people can play with it.
Yeah. Yeah. We can do that.
That was another question.
We'll put it to a branch and get it up there.
Yeah.
/cats. Okay, now GitHub.io/scratch3.0/ bananas.
Banana.
We'll still have that. So what'll happen is, you might have noticed in some of the mock-ups this looked a little bit different, and it had this other button. And so what'll happen is, you'll click on this, and then a thing will pop up in the center that will say, how do you want to create a new backdrop from the library, from a file, all those different things. Because what we've noticed in testing is the little tiny buttons that we have for this and for adding sprite are way too small, and kids always click on the wrong thing. They don't know what it is.
They can't quite. Some of the little ones also, if their mouse is very good, they can't control it.
Yeah, exactly. And so you'll notice like some of the UI elements like this are just bigger, and it's to deal with that. Mostly for kids who are like 6 and 7 and and what's funny is that age range is actually getting bigger. As kids use trackpads and mice less and less and less, the like scissor is getting worse and worse and worse.
The monitors aren't coming up
So
for...
that's why we
Oh, good call.
It's amazing.
We're doing a lot of feedback on the monitors right now. There's some question of where we want to put it, either if we want to put it in the render or...
We're trying with an iPad, but I guess it's
Not
open.
yet,
Not
yeah,
yet.
but
Okay.
we'll talk about it. It definitely, when we release, it'll work totally on iPad and Android. Yeah.
Thank you.
Those are big blocks.
Yes, we were checking him out.
So these are the guys that are interested in accessibility, and they might ask you.
Oh, actually, some of them included an accessibility question, so I was. Oh, well, I just flagged it. We'll definitely talk about it.
We did.
Okay, cool. That's great. I'm glad. Yes.
You already know Silwinski, Natalia.
That's my name. I'm from Argentina.
Oh, nice to meet you. Yeah. I was telling John earlier, and I'll answer this question later. So the whole thing, but we've sort of built in ARIA tags and all of that stuff from the very beginning. So it's already there, but it's not as polished as it needs to be. So there's still a lot more work to do. But you can already there's a lot of things that are already keyboard controllable. There's already ARIA tags in a lot of places.
Okay.
The blocks work with screen readers.
Same thing and we can use it now. It's a game. The prototype. Can we access and actually make project with it?
Yeah. So there's still a lot more work to do. And I think I think I described it to you earlier as like there's I think we've got a good foundation, but there's like potholes in it right now. Like there's some places where there's I think there's some places where we're gonna have to do some serious work. One thing that I would love to talk to you two about is schools or after-school programs or other organizations that we work with to reach kids who need these accessibility features so we can test them. When we do all this testing that I'm talking about, we're very rarely interacting with kids that need those accessibility features.
I do have people interested in it.
Oh, really?
You really want to put the fire to the metal?
Yeah, that sounds great. Not yet, but I will in the future. So, yeah, that sounds great.
Yes, the Razer. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it. Especially the way it works. It's not a million times Razer. It's significant.
Right.
Anything you can just
just on the path. So we still need more.
U.S. schools are really big in switching to extras, but if they ever did, they would not integrate this into the general curriculum, and that's where we're still going to play actually
Yeah.
One thing somebody said, I keep saying, like, why would you possibly find that? I would say it's the US, which is not
Really close to the U.S. average. It's only about 9%. Closely at everybody who's at that median and below, and look at who those kids are, they're 100% kids. Accessibility stuff is also it's also an issue of making sure that there was something that the school district could actually could endorse and say, all right, we're making this a part of the city.
pay attention to the access stuff. If they ever did, it just takes one school to be taken as a leadership by the Office of Civil Rights, right? And then they'll all just like categorically say we can't go there.
So for me, it's kind of it's an issue of
No worries, no worries. We gotta go back to the FAQ.
Yeah, just I'm not kidding, but she was saying that she thought the kids sometimes get confused if they do the student, I'll get back. So she was wondering if we're rethinking the design of the.
Yeah, definitely going to reconsider that and make it much clearer and much more apparent. Yeah, we might even break them off of the tabs and make them like buttons. It's things we're playing with, but it's come up in a couple play tests that kids will navigate to those places and not know how to get back to the blocks.
One thing you might mention, I realized, the different shape of the blocks being motivated partly by touch screens.
I was supposed to say that in that first slide, and I just got going, and I totally forgot. It was the thing I was going to say. Well, we started like going all the blocks to finding the shapes and making them easier to read and making them inviting on touch devices, and it was just like, yeah. So hopefully we'll get into that. Andrew might talk about that.
high school, free school lunch programs, things like that, would have lower retention rate. The data doesn't show that. The data, we did this study on every single kid who joined Scratch in 2015, so it's millions of sample sizes. We showed no statistical difference in retention rate.
I'd love to see how many Lawrence kids are
We should talk some more.
still using it.
There's a selection issue, right?
Yeah.
The ones you are only measuring the ones who chose to join Scratch.
Yeah, and most of them chose to do in Scratch because they're in school. And so that's part of what the paper looks at is that it's being bolstered by the fact that those kids are overwhelmingly in schools, and schools versus teachers. So I think that is an impact.
Sure, it's even trickier, right?
No, it makes this stuff easier to do.
Yeah.
But teacher accounts and student accounts only account for maybe a half a percent.
Oh, wow.
So it's so small.
I didn't realize that. It was just a paper giving us those numbers for when you get around to it.
Yeah. Well, this is the stuff that I really care about. So yeah, I'm trying to find time to do that.
I am wondering how somebody take a look, maybe what is going on in another country.
We don't. So U.S. actually it was even hard for us to get U.S. Census Bureau data. I had to.
We should probably do Q&A.
Anyway,
We're getting
we
into
can talk
like
more. Sorry, I
Q&A
got
out
sucked
here.
into
I know.
something that I love.
I know.
Sorry.
Sorry.
All right, folks. So as much as I hate to pull you away from making crazy cat sounds, I figured that the one thing that would pull folks away from playing with Scratch 3 is for us to talk about the timeline. So we put together a couple questions that we kind of knew that would get asked, and we just wanted to cover them directly. So the first question is, when will Scratch 3.0 be released? So we're going to have two major releases of 3.0. The first one will come in Q1 of this coming year. So that's a little less than 6 months away. So it's coming very, very soon. And we're going to refer to that as the alpha release. So it'll be open to all kids. It'll probably be under a domain like alpha.scratch.mit.edu. And kids will immediately start to be able to pull in their projects from 2.0, test them out, play with them, and save them locally. But kind of like Scratch X, it won't be directly integrated with the community until the full release. So the alpha will have bugs. It'll probably have some compatibility issues. It'll be missing some features, like it'll have a vector paint editor, but it won't have a bitmap one. Some things like that will be in the alpha. The release, our target is to have that out before the school year starts for a lot of our users, which is the summer of that same year. So about 6 months from that is what we're looking for the release. Now, as with all of these things, I have to, put caveats all over that, but, as you folks have seen, we've come a long way. I think the last Scratch conference, this was all completely just vaporware, and now it's a real thing that you can play with. So I feel like we're making really good progress. The next question is, will projects created in Scratch 2.0 work in Scratch 3? This is an easy one. Yes. In fact, oh, that's nice. I didn't think that would be an applause line. That's cool.
That's amazing.
You can actually already start to test this today, and I'm actually just going to pop out of here just to show this really quick. So I'm going to go to my Scratch profile, and whoa, what? All right, this screen is pretty funny. So I'm going to go to my profile and look at some of my favorite projects. And let's see, what's one that I really like? Oh, I really like this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the project ID, and I'm going to pull it into the GUI, and I'm going to put # and then that project ID in here. And I'm going to hit return, and it's going to load the project. And there you go, a working 2.0 project. All right, on to the next one. So the next burning question is, what platforms will Scratch 3 support? And this is funny. I think I walked up and down, and I think I got this question like 100 times. So on release, so not the alpha, but the full release, will work on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and Raspberry Pi, all in the browser, plus Android and iOS tablets. So there's a ton of work that's going to go into that. We have got lots of Edge and Internet Explorer and Firefox and Safari and all these different platforms. We've got a lot of compatibility work to do there, but we already have working prototypes on iOS and Android, which are one of our major concerns from the very beginning. That's a major motivator for why we did all of this work, and so we'll have that ready at release. After release, we'll be looking into native apps for iOS and Android. So on release date, you'll be able to get to it through the browser, either through mobile Safari or Chrome. But there's some advantages to having a native app as well. Some of them are like kids can find you more easily, but there's also a lot of advantages for extensions for native applications because they have access to the Bluetooth stack and things like that. So we'll be doing that post-release, but on day one, it'll work. The other thing that we're looking at, and I think we have some folks from the Raspberry Pi Foundation here somewhere. Where are you? Are you here? Yay, all right. So we've been working closely with the Raspberry Pi Foundation on 3.0 as well. So some of you might have noticed that 2.0 for the Raspberry Pi just came out. So that was quite a long turnaround between 2.0's release and it being available on the Raspberry Pi. So we're working with the Raspberry Pi Foundation on 3.0 now so that we can make sure that there's a good experience there. And we're going to try to get that out shortly after the release as well. So next is time for Q&A. So I'm going to give my mic to Saskia so that she can ask some questions, and we'll try our best to answer them.
All right. So I'm going to still look at some questions too. So if you guys have other questions, you can tweet at Scratch and hashtag Scratch3. But some of the ones that came up are, where are the say blocks and will they be back?
Sure. We just haven't implemented them yet. We're still building that out. But the say blocks will come back. They definitely will be there. We're not taking them out. I think a few people asked about a couple blocks that aren't around, but we just haven't gotten to those explicitly, like video motion.
So you folks probably noticed that we demoed the say blocks. So we've got them roughly implemented-ish, but probably just good enough to like get through this demo before it explodes terribly. So we want to make sure that it's a little bit more solid before we land it. But that said, we do have the ability to kind of push experimental branches up for the community, and so many people asked about the speech blocks that after this, we'll work with the team to get a branch pushed, and then maybe we'll promote it through our social media channel so that other folks can see it.
So there were a few questions about accessibility considerations and screen readers.
Yay. Accessibility, and I'll also put localization in this category as well. Accessibility and localization were major design requirements from the very beginning of this thing. So Scratch 3.0, as you see it today, already supports RTL, right-to-left languages like Hebrew. It also already supports screen readers as it exists today. So we've already started to add ARIA tags. We've already started to do some basic work with screen readers. That said, one of the challenges that we have is just working with groups and programs that are really passionate about accessibility and the kind of work that we do. We need to be able to test this with kids in order to make sure that the experience is great, and that's been a challenge for us. And I just met some lovely people over in the corner up there just before this that I think we might have some leads. So there's still a lot more work to be done on accessibility, but it's something that we're making really good progress on.
This is a very scratchy question. How can I contribute?
Yay. Aw, that's so nice. So there's a bunch of different ways to contribute, and I think one thing that we haven't done enough of, but I think now that we're starting to share things publicly that I think we're going to try to ramp up with is making it easier for people to find ways to contribute. So right now we have on the development side, it's really easy to jump in and start writing code and start hacking on things. So if you go to github.com/LLK, you'll see all of the repos. Everything that we're doing is open source from day one with this. And in all of those repos, you'll see tons and tons of issues, hundreds, actually thousands of issues. And many of them are labeled with help wanted. Looks like that. And so if you just do a search in GitHub for all of our repos and just look for things that say help wanted, if you're a coder or into engineering, this is a great place to go. Another thing that you can do is contribute bugs. So as we were walking around, I walked by somebody who couldn't get the rendering engine to show for some reason on their laptop. That's a thing that we need to know about and fix. And so if you're so inclined, filing bugs or letting us know about things that you find, particularly within this audience, is really valuable as well. And then last but not least, something that a lot of the Scratchers have started to do, and I absolutely love this, is finding projects in 2.0 that don't run right in 3.0. And so they constantly just like flood my profile with them. It's so awesome. So we have a studio actually called Scratch Testing Studio where we are actually collecting all of these. And so that's another thing that we'll try to promote so that folks can find that studio a little bit more easily and contribute projects like that.
So there are quite a bit of high ceiling questions, specifically considering Gpio, special cards, advanced operator blocks, resolution, and power function blocks.
Cool. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to address all of those, but so Gpio, I'm guessing, is probably a Raspberry Pi question. So I talked about that a little bit, working closely with the Raspberry Pi Foundation to get Gpio support and Scratch 3.0 shipped to the Raspberry Pi as soon as we can. some of the additional blocks, you'll probably notice, as Carl mentioned, there's a lot of blocks that aren't implemented yet, like video motion, lists, ask and wait. Procedures in general. Like, there's just like a lot of stuff that we haven't implemented yet. There's a kind of a laundry list of things that haven't been implemented yet that we're working on. But then in addition to that, there's also a laundry list of sort of high ceiling features or small changes and additions of blocks that we're really interested in, like additional operators, additional ways of dealing with lists. It's kind of a huge list. So it's definitely things that we're thinking about. I don't know, did I miss anything? Okay.
Will speech recognition be available for all languages?
Oh, man. No. I just, you have to answer that question directly. No. It'll work. So there's kind of a two-pronged approach that we're taking with the speech recognition work. One is if you're on Chrome, we're using Chrome's built-in speech recognition API that I believe works with 14 languages or something like that. I would have to check the exact number. And if you are using a browser that doesn't support those APIs, we'll be falling back to a cloud version of speech recognition APIs that also supports roughly 14 languages. Now, that's 14 languages today. They're constantly adding more. So today there's 14. Next week there might be 15. At release, it's kind of hard to say how many there will be there, but we'll constantly be adding them as they become available. It's a really hard problem, though.
Just a few more. Where is Build-A-Block/extensions?
Oh, here, you want to handle that?
Yeah, I think that probably is like my blocks or custom procedures. We're actually sort of revisiting some of the UX around that. Again, we wanted to make sure that there's a lot of emphasis on the low floor, as I already talked about that for a while. But I think we're going to go back and explore that model. We definitely want to have it. It's not like we're taking it out, but I think it needs some more love and attention to get it feeling right. Whoa. What was the other?
I think it was extensions. I can handle that. So the extensions interface we're working on now, it's actually, the engineering side of it is moving along really nicely. And then there's an equivalent side to it, which is the design side, which we built, prototyped, tested, decided it was awful, started all over again, and are now on round 2, and it's feeling a lot better. So we're feeling like we're getting close to the interface for extensions. So we're hoping that the extensions spec, the engineering spec, as well as the extensions flow getting added to the interface should happen before the end of the year. I don't want to make promises, but I think that's probably doable.
And the last one is, will there be an undo?
Yes. Yeah, there will be. I like that question. That's great. These are the details that we like agonize over, and then it's like, nobody cares. You all care. So yes, there will be an undo. We actually already have undo redo working in the blocks workspace, but we're just working on extending it out to everything else, so it's kind of one fluid undo redo experience across all the different tabs. So that's going to take a little bit more. That's going to take a lot more work, but it's already working for the blocks.
One more. Will Scratch 3 be based on Flash?
No. No applause for that line? Okay. No, Scratch 3.0 is not based on Flash. There is no Flash in the code base at all. It is all based on HTML5 technologies, so JavaScript, CSS, HTML. For mobile devices, it's been built in such a way that it's modular. So there are places, particularly on mobile devices, for native extensions where there will be a native layer in addition to all of the web tech. And that's mostly for performance. But yeah, there's no more Flash. Oh, and there's one more question.
I would like to propose some ideas from the Scratch 3.0. A new block would define the distance between 2 Sprites.
Thanks. Yeah, like I said, there's a whole bunch of operators and reporters that we're still playing around with. I think one of my favorite parts of the Scratch community is just how outgoing kids are with all of their suggestions. Sometimes there are things that we can't do for various reasons, but I think a lot of them we're really excited about. And I think distance between 2 sprites has been something that kids have been asking for a really long time. Oh, last but not least is, I think there was a question about the difference between the horizontal and the vertical grammar. So when we first started working on 3.0, we actually, our first prototype was actually with the horizontal grammar. Some folks refer to this as the Scratch Junior grammar, right? So it's these blocks that are icon-based and run from left to right, versus what we call the vertical grammar. This is like the Scratch grammar. So one thing that we've done is today, Scratch and Scratch Junior are 2 totally separate platforms. There's not really a way for a kid who builds a project in Scratch Junior to open that project in Scratch, which feels like a really obvious missed opportunity. And also with all of the work that we're putting into the 3.0 platform, it also felt important for us to have a single unified platform between the 2 things for a variety of reasons. One, just being maintenance and speed of release and all those kinds of practical things that are boring. And so one thing that you can do in 3.0 is you can actually translate, so this program here on the left, or this stack, you can just kind of press a button in 3.0 and it turns into that stack, right? Because they're functionally equivalent. But you can't go the other way, right? So you can have operators and conditionals and all sorts of like deeply nested things in the vertical grammar that doesn't work in the horizontal. And I think that's raised a bunch of questions where people are like, oh my gosh, the horizontal grammar is going to take over and then we're going to lose all these features. That's not what we're doing. Scratch will continue to be the vertical grammar. One of the places in addition to Scratch Junior that we're interested in with the horizontal grammar is mobile phones. So mobile phones are really tough. I think Wolfgang is here somewhere. He knows almost better than anybody. There he is. And so just dealing with some of these size constraint issues, dealing with space constraint issues, dealing with performance issues, dealing with complexity issues, dealing with just issues around mobile phones where there's kind of a difference in the amount of time and attention that a kid might be able to give to a phone versus a tablet or a desktop computer. And so for all of these things, we've also been testing the horizontal grammar on phones as kind of a way, as a gateway into the rest of Scratch. I think that's it. Well, thanks everybody. And scratch on.
I have one more question, so please a second on stage. On behalf of a friend of Nigeria who happened to be influenced by MIT 6 years ago. So he was 11 years old, Samson Godi from Nigeria. He should have been here. He was denied visa. 6 years ago, Cloud Area, I think, came from to Nigeria with 1 laptop per child laptops, and Samson got on. And between his 11th and 17th year, he taught all over the province he's living in. He taught all teachers in this area. And he kind of lost connection with Scratch with 2.0 because he is on this 1 laptop per child. So how are you doing with Sugar? Sugar is the operating system running on the 1 laptop per child, which is an important computer platform in African communities.
We haven't been in touch with we have a long history with the OLPC project, just coming out of the Media Lab and us being based at the Media Lab as well. But we haven't been in touch with the Sugar team too much, but we've mostly just been heads down. I think a lot of the folks that we aren't talking to, it isn't because we aren't interested in talking to them, it's just we have a small team and are doing lots of things. So I think we'd be more than interested in talking to the Sugar folks, the Brick folks. I mean, there's a really long list of people who are doing amazing, incredible work in Africa, and the Africa Code Week folks who I think are here, and we'd like to talk to them and understand what their needs are as well. So, yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
If this clock is right, we are finishing just in time. Any questions to the organization? Okay, enjoy your evening.